This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to The Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. This week marks the 3rd anniversary of The Trap Set, so I got together with my co-producer Chris to explore some of the themes that have emerged over the years, and we also revisited a handful of the many moments that have stuck with us personally. I'm here with my co-producer and editor Chris Karwowski to celebrate The Trap Set's 3rd birthday.
Hey, hello.
How's it going, Chris?
That's going great. How about yourself, Joe?
Great. Did you think we would be doing the podcast for 3 years?
Yes. You seemed, when we first started talking about it, you seemed fairly determined to kind of like really make this a thing. And so I kind of saw this as a long-term project, honestly.
So do you regret signing on to do it?
Sometimes in the darkest of night, yes. No. No, it's been overall like a really great, wonderful experience.
Well, the reason that I wanted to bring you in is because you worked for The Onion for 12 years and you worked at Adult Swim, and you have a strong sense of how to shape a narrative and how to tell a story.
Right.
And also because you're not a drummer by trade and you're not a professional musician. And I wanted somebody to come in and cut out all of the shop talk that non-musicians might find boring.
Right.
So,
and your wish has been granted.
So what do you get out of listening to a bunch of drummers talk? It must be awful.
It's the worst. The thing I get out of it is, one, I am, as you know, I'm an amateur musician. I'm not the worst guitarist in the world. But I would say that, like, something I've always admired is really, really, really good drumming. And, I've always kind of, like, I think all the other musicians, when you get up to a certain level, all of a sudden their eyes kind of go to the drummer. That's something that, all my friends used to talk about, is like, oh, that, like that guy, he's great. Like, he really, the drummer drives the band. They don't get the credit. They don't get the accolades. And they often, as we've discussed, get replaced a lot. But the drummer is a lot, often the shit.
We decided that we'd like to break down these clips into some of the themes that have inadvertently woven their way through the show. One of the things that arises in most episodes is how people identify. Some people identified as drummers for as long as they can remember.
My father had a drum set in the house, so when I was 4, I just went over to it and started playing. And I remember it now, so it's not like I don't remember what happened. I played like kind of the Gene Krupa tom-tom thing, and I could play it really good. It made sense, didn't sound like a little kid just banging on stuff. That night, my father took me to a nightclub where his friends were playing, and I sat in with the band and played Sweet Georgia Brown.
When you were 4?
Yeah, I couldn't sit down. I had to stand up to operate the pedals and stuff.
Another category is the drummers that never had ambitions of becoming professional musicians and just sort of fell into it.
Right, like Laurie Barbera.
One of my favorite stories is her first sound check, not knowing the names of the different parts of the drum kit.
The sound engineer, Ron Anderson, we were there with Dinosaur Jr. We took the stuff out of my basement, like all the gear and everything, and I didn't know how to break down the drums. I didn't know how to set up the drums. I was not a drummer. I just played in the basement, and so I think maybe Bob Josem set them up for me. I don't know. So we had a van. So I had to carry stuff up the steps and put it in the back of the van, like how it was set up downstairs, so I knew how to set it up again.
Uh-huh.
And drive really slow, because I only lived about maybe a mile from 7th Street Entry at that time in South Minneapolis. And so we drove down there, unloaded it, set it up. And so I'm sitting there, and I was so nervous. My leg was going so fast. And there's microphones on everything. And I was like, oh, this is the real deal. And I hear Ron go, okay, Laurie, because I know him, Laurie, hit the snare. And I'm just kind of sitting there, and everyone's looking at me. J Mask's, I'm like, He's like, hit the snare. And I'm just sitting there and I'm getting more and more shaky. My heart is beating harder. Just talking about right now, my heart goes because it brings back this memory. And he's like, is there anything wrong? And I just bend down onto a microphone that's in front of me on one of and I go, which one is the snare? that was the true story.
So then another aspect of identity that we often explore on the show is how a drummer fits into a band. So one example of that would be from our very first episode with Brendan Canty.
Right.
And he talks about how he felt invisible when he was standing next to Ian or Guy
Right.
after a show. Nobody wanted to talk to him. They wanted to talk to the charismatic front people.
And then he talks about, feeling kind of like he kind of reinflates after like those guys leave.
Like he can't, their charisma draws his sense of self out of his body.
Yeah, or literally sucks the air out of the room.
Even now, like a lot of that energy around Fugazi comes towards Ian, and then or to Guy, but very rarely to Joe and I. So it's really hard. Like it's like, sort of I'm standing next to Ian, I kind of don't exist. But if he walks away, then I'm sort of, a full person.
Another aspect of identity that we've explored is what people do when they move on to other things, when drumming becomes less central to who they are as a person.
I mean, they're like their gig after their big gig.
One example of that is Marc Trombino from Drive Like Jehu.
Oh, yeah.
After that band broke up, he started producing big records for pop punk bands such as Blink-182 and Jimmy Eat World.
Which isn't so much of a left turn.
No. But then he took a real left turn when he opened up Donut Friend here in Los Angeles, which is the most popular donut restaurant in LA and is about to open another location downtown.
All that nitpicking and like I made
it's totally
so
essential.
Many versions of the donuts like over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Like,
how many?
Hundreds? Hundreds probably. Like I'm still tweaking it to this day, like still tweaking that recipe. I thought I had everything together. I did all my recipes. I thought I was like pretty good. Things seemed good. Built the restaurant, had all like real equipment and started making donuts and was like, this isn't that good. And so basically decided I'm not going to open for another couple months until I actually really get this right. And so it was just, again, this iterative process where I just kept making donut after donut after donut after donut, and finally at some point had to be like just like throw my hands up and go like, it's not going to be perfect, but we got to open, so I had to like have a self-imposed deadline of like, just fucking stop it and just let's start selling donuts and I'll just figure it out, so when we opened I actually wasn't all that stoked on the donuts.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Some people that gain notoriety earlier in their life have a hard time adjusting to a new identity once the vehicle for their notoriety disappears.
Right.
One example of that would be McNeely from the Jesus Lizard. And he discussed how he had to kind of redefine himself after he ceased to be that guy. He ceased to be the drummer for the Jesus Lizard.
When I quit the band, I felt like my whole identity was gone.
Yes.
Because that's how I thought of myself as, well, I'm the drummer in the Jesus Lizard. This is what I do. This is what I know how to do. I have fun at it, enjoy it. And, then that was all like gone. And I did not know how to be me. I didn't know how to find me right then. So it was like, I went through some pretty serious depression about it, although nothing like, thinking about ending my life or anything crazy like that. I'm too much of a optimist for that. But, I just, dark times for a bit. And I have to say that, I have to really honestly credit my wife for sticking with me because that could have ended up in disaster too. But she was great in that she knew that there was something in there, that the reason we got married, the reason we were, fell for each other in the first place, that she was able to like stick with me. And then eventually I think I kind of came through it to where our relationship began to deepen and other things started to mean more to me. And like I said, I started to look inside and go, what can I take responsibility for the way things are going?
One of the things that's been a recurring thing since the beginning is how a musician / drummer can be a parent, because that was one of the struggles that you were like wrestling with at the time of the start of the podcast. You know, who in your mind is a pretty good example of that?
Yeah, one of the first ones that comes to mind is Mimi from the band Low. They actually brought their kids on tour with them and remained active as a band throughout their entire childhood.
Right.
And when Mimi came here, her oldest, I think, is almost ready to go off to college.
Right.
When we decided to have kids, we didn't think about it that much that it was going to change anything. We just assumed that they would now just be coming with us and that we would just make it work.
And that's what happened?
And that's what happened, yeah.
How old are your kids?
17 and 13.
And how did parenthood change your life?
Well, I mean, it changes your focus from yourself to somebody else, you know, whereas you tend to maybe be more in your own head and more selfish, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then, you know, when you have kids, you realize, well, I guess their needs are obvious and more desperate than mine. So you just kind of change accordingly.
Lots of times having kids forces people into kind of a redemptive cycle.
Right.
And one great example of that is Chad from the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Oh, yeah.
Who, by his own words, was a complete degenerate.
Right.
And once he had his kids, he had to get his shit together.
Right. Yeah, it felt like his heart really opened up and he became seemed like a real stand-up guy.
He sounded like he was probably a lot of fun before that, too. But wait, how many kids do you have?
I have 6 children. I was married once, my first marriage, and I have a daughter. Then I have another relationship, I have another son. Then with another relationship, I have another daughter.
Yeah.
And 3 boys with my wife, Nancy. You know, Cole, our oldest, was probably 4 or 5 years old, and it was just like, I was just doing stupid stuff. And really, and alcohol and drugs were behind it, and I was like, okay, I got to stop doing that. And once I figured that out, then it was like, okay, I got to be there for my kids. I got to be there for my wife. And it was hard. Certainly at the beginning, this was 9 years ago. And, you know, you're used to a certain lifestyle and nobody telling you no.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not in the gutter. I'm in a successful rock band. I'm playing great. Whatever, you know, you could tell yourself all this stuff. But it was more spiritually, I was pretty bankrupt. And so I'm like, okay, let's try this. And went to rehab, and yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of cliche, but it was like, that's what I needed to do. And
it took after the first try?
Yep, I've only been to 1 rehab.
Another theme that arises is how people navigate through the world of addiction.
Right.
And I would say that almost everybody that I talked to that had problems with substance abuse was over the hump.
Right.
One of my favorite examples of somebody who turned their life around was Steve Ferrone from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Right.
And this ties back into our theme of children being a redemptive force.
We called ourselves the Steve Brothers. And Steve called me up and asked me how I was doing, and I was a mess. And I knew that he'd stopped drinking, but he never ever mentioned about, you know, going to any program or anything. And he asked me if I wanted to go and get some help with AA. And my knee-jerk reaction to that was, no, I don't want to go. I'm not that bad. I don't want to go down there. And he said, well, stay where you are, and I'll get back to you. And he jumped on a plane in Austin, Texas, and he flew to New York, and he took me to my first AA meeting. And the only the only reason that I went to that was out of the goodness of my heart. Because he'd
made the whole trip. Yeah.
Tried to take me to trying to help me. And I walked into that meeting and I sat and I watched the guy talk and I felt better. And that was the thing that kept me going back, because before that I felt awful. I was in a losing battle, really. And it's been 24 years.
You still go?
Every day. It's the way I stay sober on the road, the way I maintain my sobriety. It's the most important thing that I have. I got all those children, 12, it took 12 years for that. I used to live in that house there, I used to own that house there. And it took 12 years for all that mess that I had with the kids and the courts and everything to come together. I had all those problems were in there with me, in that little bit there. My bedroom was there. They were all in there with me Christmas Day, every problem that I had. Now, if you'd asked me, when I first started going, if you just said, listen, all you got to do is do your best that you can with this, and don't drink and don't use one day at a time, and 12 years from now, all this stuff that you have going on now will be over. I would have said, 12 years? Are you kidding me? You want me to do 12 years of this? But when you get there and you're sitting there and everything's resolved, it seems like yesterday that it happened, So now I'm another 12 years on from that, I have 8 grandchildren. All my children love me. All my grandchildren love me.
One of the things that I ask people a lot is how much they think when they play, and how much of it is more of like a visceral gut instinct type thing. And one of the most interesting responses that we've gotten to that is Shayna Dunkleman, who doesn't draw a distinction between her intellectual mind and her gut response. She sees it as kind of a continuum of the same thing.
I do climbing, and when every single inch of your body is doing the fucking best to get the top of the wall, it feels like ecstasy. Or sex, you're using your entire body to achieve something, and that's really fucking special.
Yeah, I try not to think of as much when I'm having sex as when I'm playing music, for example. Or sometimes I try to use that analogy for music. Like when you're having sex, you're not thinking necessarily too much about the mechanics of what you're doing.
Really?
Right?
I totally do.
Oh, you do?
I totally do.
You're maximizing efficiency.
Well, not really that,
maximize
but
pleasure.
No. Well, that's the thing. I don't equate using strategy as a robot voice. It's not like a robotic move for me. I think it's just totally a natural process between my brain and body. It's just one thing. It's interesting for me to separate. Actually, it's strange for me to separate it, because it's part of you. Why is one thing not the other thing? And I don't really shut off my brain when I'm having sex. It's not there are a lot of physical impulses there, what feels good and not. And I'm not really trying to connect it between music and sex, but I think in terms of my my response, you are thinking at the same time as you're just feeling it.
Yeah, another person that gave a really interesting response to that was Hamid Drake, because I asked him if he had an out-of-body experience when he played drums, and he said that it drew him more inside. He said it felt more of an in-body experience, more attached to himself, more present, more in the moment. And I thought that was really cool. Did you feel like you had an out-of-body experience, or just goosebumps up your spine, or what was it?
I had a real in-body experience.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Because if you have the outer body experience, you're not going to feel goosebumps and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because you're not aware of your body per se. But it was a very tactile, very in-body experience, my heart beating and getting really excited, And then something happened also where, in my own way, my own sort of thinking as a kid at that time, I saw that this instrument, the drum set, was actually a multiple instrument.
Yeah.
You know, it was something that it was many instruments combined into one, you know, to make this contraption, as it used to be called.
Another common theme that arises is self-doubt and fear. Just last week, we had Abe Rounds on, who's burst onto the scene as a drummer over the last few years and played with everyone from Michelle and Indegiacello to Seal in a very short time. And he's only 26 years old.
Right.
But he's making his first album, and he's constantly wondering if it's any good and if he's any good or if he sucks. And you would think that those thoughts might subside as you get more experienced and more successful, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, one of the most successful people who's ever been on the show is Phil Collins, and we had a really good discussion about fear.
It's just fear. You know, it's not like you know, I mean, it will be fine. It's always been fine before. There's no
Has there
reason
always been fear before?
No. I mean, there's always fear. I mean, sometimes you go to bed at night and you think, by the time I go to bed tomorrow night, I'll have done a show. You know, that's terrifying. Then it's done and you know what it feels like and you think, okay, so that's what I need to do. So you get on with it, you know. But
I was a little scared to come over here.
Why?
Same reasons. I was just like, okay, I'm going to Phil Collins' house. In a couple hours, it'll be done.
Am I nice?
You're a nice man.
Thank you.
I sense a darkness beneath the surface.
Of me?
Yeah.
No, there's no darkness in me.
I mean, over the course of your career, you've played with the artiest of art bands. You've done the poppiest pop records. You've achieved massive commercial success. You've achieved critical acclaim and derision, but mostly acclaim. You've done Broadway. You've done movies. What's left? What excites you moving forward artistically?
Well, you know, I can't imagine another album, but it would be nice to think that there might be. But to do that, I have to learn how to turn the studio on and start working on my own.
What do you mean you have to learn how to do it? You've done it before.
Yeah, but my little studio here, I've not turned it on since it was put in a year ago.
What's keeping you from doing that?
Fear.
Another topic that comes up a lot is parents.
Right.
Well, one of your favorite clips is from episode 1, Brendan Canty talking about his dad coming to see Fugazi play.
Yeah, I love that clip.
He only came out to see us once when we were up in Seattle. And we were playing in this big theater. It's like 1,200 people, and the place is going nuts. I mean, there's people, Guy is like tackling people off the stage. And it was like, I think it was in 91 or something. It was really like sort of the pinnacle of the craziness. And my dad, I'm like playing drums, and I look over to my left. I see my dad coming through the stage door because he couldn't come through the crowd, obviously. But they let him on the stage, and he saw me, and he walked across this, like on stage, and then stood right next to me, right to the left of me, and like was like standing there with his crutches. He had this like arm brace crutches, and he's looking around. And he kind of looked like a silverback ape. He was all bent over and like kind of crazy and crotchety looking. He's looking over the crowd. He makes it through about a song and a half, and then he gives me a big knock on my arm, and he goes, "All right, me and your mom are going home. Great job." And then he just lumbered home.
I mean, that's all you can ask for as a kid.
A song and a half. He made it through it. My mom saw me a bunch.
He got it, right?
But he got it. Yeah, like, right, exactly.
I get it.
Yeah, right.
And then another good one is Venzella Joy, Beyonce's drummer. Do you remember that one, Joe?
Yep. Venzella talked about growing up in Buffalo, and her mom passed away when Venzella was pretty young. I think she was in her late teens, early 20s.
I think right around when she was like starting to kind of like take off. She took off pretty early.
Yeah, she got on a TV show, and just a couple years after that started playing with Beyonce. And I think about Joy a lot because I think she's one of the most impressive people to have been on the show, not only for her positive outlook, but her determination and how she kind of sees things before they happen.
Right.
Like she says, I move in silence. She has a plan in her mind and she doesn't really talk about it. She just executes it and does enormous things with her life.
And she's just cool.
My mom, she passed away in 2009.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. But she was a nurse. And my dad, he was in entertainment as well.
My mom was a nurse too.
Really?
I think nurses are a special breed of people.
They really are. Yeah, they're like extra caring, you know? Like it takes a big heart to take care of people outside of like your family and friends.
What kind of nurse was your mom?
She was an LPN.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where did she work? Like in an ER or?
No, not in ER. More so
Okay.
geriatrics. Yeah.
Yeah, then she really deserves a lot of credit.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
My dad lives in one of those kind of places. And the people that work there are doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, they really are. Like you need somebody with a warm heart, you know, great energy to be around during that, you know, time.
Yeah, I have to say the whole experience of interviewing Barnard early on was, it felt like a big achievement. It just looking across the room and seeing his face looking at me felt a bit surreal because I look up to him so much. And I remember, I think he forgot that we were doing an interview. So when I went over to his house in New Jersey, he was still in his bathrobe, and he's like, well, I guess we better make some coffee. And, you know, I wasn't anticipating hitting the emotional depths that we went to. But, yeah, I mean, when he told me about what happened with his father, we both had to take a break because we both started crying.
First of all, when my mother died, I didn't realize that my mother died and she wasn't coming back.
Right.
I mean, that's how young my mind was. That day my mother died, we went on a church picnic. I had the time of my life. I had the best time I had ever had. And all of picnics and everything else combined. That day, I did everything that I was supposed to do. They allowed me to go to the front of the line. I got on this, and I didn't want and didn't need for anything. Because the thing was, in my mind, this is the church picnic. I'll go back home and tell my mother everything that we did. That's where it was for me. And of course, when I got off the bus, I ran home about 11 o'clock, and between 10 and 11 at night, I'm going to tell my mother everything that happened. They had already taken her out, and her body was over at the funeral home. Then it started to hit me that, well, my mother's not going to be here anymore. And I still didn't understand it, because my mind was a very, very young mind. And I didn't understand that at all. And after a while, you got to check yourself out and, you know, realize that Mama's not coming back. Then I had my father, 13 and a half. He got shot by his best friend.
What happened?
Well, they had been out gambling. And my father won the money. And he won between $400 and $500 night before Christmas.
Damn.
And he took his friend, taking him home, he was his best friend, 6 miles away, took him, drove him home, and when he went to turn the car around, and all this was told to us by his best friend, he comes out with a shotgun and said, "You give me this $2 or I'm going to blow your brains out." So my father says, "Nope." Said he hit the shotgun and the trigger. The guy had his hand on the trigger, and it went off.
But he told you that? The friend?
Yes. This was my father's best friend. This man suffered as much. You might as well say he died when my father died. He did not want to go to court or anything else. He wanted to be locked up for the rest of his life.
Is that what he got?
No. He got 6 years for manslaughter at the time. But he
thought it was an accident, or it was an accident?
It was an accident. And the other thing that went down the pike was this man was devastated. He was devastated. He did not want to live. They had him on suicide watch and everything else. And all he ever did was talk about his best friend James, what he did. When he went to court, he just told him, he says, you can do anything you want with me. Because he didn't want to live. But it was. He got 6 years for manslaughter because he wasn't supposed to have the shotgun. And that's basically what it all comes down to. Nothing was premeditated.
And your family was able to forgive him?
We all forgave him. I did. But I forgave him when I found out that coming out of jail.
What's something that, this podcast has given you? I know it's increased your interviewing. You've gotten better at it as an interviewer. But what is something else, like maybe a little bit more intangible, that this podcast has given you?
It's brought me a new kind of creative joy.
Right.
It's helped me. I think it's served as a bridge to more creative projects.
Mm-hmm.
So one example is next week there's a Netflix special coming out that I co-produced. And the reason I got to co-produce it is because of this podcast.
Right.
And we'll talk about that more later.
Right.
Yeah, so I just want to thank everybody who's supported the show over the last few years, and hopefully we'll keep doing it for a long time.
Yes, thank you,
That's
everyone.
The plan, anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening, everyone. It's been an amazing ride so far, and we're going to keep on going.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.